He thought the valley would be nothing but silence, ruins, and echoes of war. But when giant widows stepped from the shadows and said, "We haven't been touched since the war," it left only one question: had he discovered a sanctuary of grief, or a destiny that would demand everything he had to give? The wind off the high ridges cut sharp as a blade, carrying dust that stung Calder Briggs' face as he urged his horse onward. The trail had narrowed into a threadbare line carved along the cliffs, the kind of path that warned men to turn back. But Calder wasn't the kind to heed warnings. He had drifted through half the frontier since the war ended, always looking for a place where silence might finally let him rest. Folks in taverns spoke of a hidden valley, untouched, abandoned, forgotten, a place men rode into and never returned. That suited him fine. He wasn't looking for company. By late afternoon, storm clouds stacked high over the peaks, smearing the horizon in gray. Calder's horse, a rangy bay named Flint, tossed its head nervously as thunder rumbled in the distance. The air smelled heavy, damp, with the promise of rain. Below, the land fell away into a green basin, rimmed by jagged stone walls. A valley, lush and oddly still, stretched out like a secret sealed from the world. Calder reined in, scanning the slopes. No smoke from chimneys, no grazing cattle, no wagons rolling along a track. Just quiet. He urged Flint down a deer trail that zigzagged to the floor of the valley. Grass stood waist-high in places, swaying in the wind. The homesteads he passed looked broken by time roofs caved, fences rotted, doors swinging loose. The war had emptied plenty of settlements like this. Calder dismounted at one cabin, pushing open the sagging door. Inside, dust lay thick, broken only by bird tracks and the scattered bones of a long-dead mule. Silence pressed on him, the kind of silence that rang louder than any battle. He led Flint onward until he spotted a thin column of smoke twisting upward from behind a stand of cottonwoods. Calder frowned. Someone was here. Instinct had him check the Colt at his hip, though he left it holstered. The war had taught him that drawing first often meant dying first. As he neared the grove, voices reached him low, steady, unmistakably women's voices. Calder paused, listening. The words were muffled, but the cadence was strange, weighty with authority. Then came the sharp crack of an axe striking wood, followed by laughter deep, resonant, unlike any he had heard in years. He eased Flint through the trees and froze. Across a clearing stood a cluster of towering figures, their forms lit by firelight. Women, yet no women Calder had ever seen. They were immense, shoulders broad beneath homespun dresses, their faces weathered but fierce. Each carried the presence of someone who had worked the land and carried burdens far heavier than most men could shoulder. One swung the axe as if it weighed nothing, splitting logs with practiced rhythm. Another stirred a kettle over the flames, her arms thick as a blacksmith's. Calder's breath caught, not from fear alone but from the strangeness of it. These weren't widows waiting for rescue. They looked like guardians of a forgotten kingdom. And as the firelight caught their eyes, he realized they were already watching him. The nearest woman stepped forward, her shadow stretching long across the clearing. Her voice rolled like distant thunder. "You shouldn't have come here, stranger. Before we ride deeper into this strange valley, tell me, what would you have done in Calder's boots? Drop a comment below." Calder kept his hand near the butt of his Colt, though he didn't draw. The woman who had spoken towered a head and shoulders above him, her hair streaked with gray, her jaw set like stone. The firelight picked out scars running across her forearm, half hidden by the rolled sleeve of her dress. She wasn't alone. From the shadows, 5 more figures emerged, each as tall, each hardened by years of survival. They moved with the confidence of people who feared nothing that might come down a trail. The leader closed the distance between them until Calder could see the cold steadiness in her eyes. "You've crossed into our valley," she said. "Few men have tried. None have stayed." Calder inclined his head slightly. Didn't know it belonged to anyone. I was just looking for a place to water my horse." One of the others, a red-haired woman with arms like coiled rope, let out a bitter laugh. "Watering your horse, is it? That's what the last one claimed before he tried to steal from our storehouse." Calder met her stare without flinching. "If I were here to steal, I'd have come with more than one worn-out horse and a trail coat patched 3 times over." The red-haired woman stepped closer, but the leader raised a hand, stopping her. "He's not lying," she murmured, though her eyes never left Calder. "Still, truth doesn't excuse trespass." Another woman circled behind him. Calder felt the shift of air as she pulled his rifle from the scabbard on Flint's saddle. A second woman relieved him of the Colt. He tensed, every muscle ready to strike. But the leader's steady gaze rooted him in place. Fighting 6 giants in their own camp was suicide. "What do you want with me?" Calder asked finally. The leader studied him for a long moment, as though weighing the measure of his soul. "My name's Martha Vale," she said. "We are the widows of this valley. Our men marched to war 20 years ago and never returned. Since then, no one has crossed that ridge and lived to speak of us." The words hung heavy in the smoke. Calder had seen his share of ruined towns after the border war, places where women outnumbered men 10 to 1. But these women hadn't broken. They'd grown harder, bigger, as if the valley itself had shaped them into something otherworldly. Martha's voice lowered, carrying the edge of hunger and grief entwined. "We've been untouched since the war. No man has laid a hand or claim on us in all those years, and now one rides into our valley alone." The circle tightened around him, 6 pairs of eyes gleaming in the firelight. Calder swallowed hard, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Then I suppose I've stepped where I don't belong." Martha's lips curved into something between a smile and a warning. "Belonging is not for you to decide. The valley chooses, and it has not chosen lightly." The women closed ranks, their shadows merging into one. Flint stamped nervously, sensing his master's peril. Calder knew escape would not come easy. He had wandered into a secret kept too long, and secrets this heavy were never given up freely. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the night, while Calder sat on a rough-hewn bench with his hands bound loosely in front of him. Around him the women spoke in low tones, voices carrying the weight of years spent in silence, with no man to answer back. Though he was their captive, they had given him a plate of roasted venison and a tin cup of water. Hospitality and threat wove together here like threads in the same cloth. Martha Vale, the leader, stood near the fire. Her broad frame cast a long shadow across the circle. She addressed him plainly, her tone like a gavel striking oak. "You've stumbled into a valley that history forgot. Since the border war, no man has crossed into our land and left alive. Do you know why?" Calder met her gaze. "Because you made it so." Martha's eyes narrowed, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked to the others, who nodded in grim agreement. "The war took our husbands," she said. Every one of them marched away with promises of glory. They never came back. Some fell at Shiloh Ridge, others at Hollow Creek. The rest vanished into prison camps or foreign soil. The men died, and the world outside moved on. But we stayed. A tall woman named Ruth, her hair braided tight and her shoulders squared like a soldier's, spoke up. "We buried our grief with our hands in this soil. We raised children who grew and left, seeking towns where men still lived. Those who remained became what you see before you." Calder studied their faces in the firelight. Some were scarred by toil, others lined with sorrow, but all were fierce. These were not abandoned women waiting to be saved. They had built their own order, and in their solitude, it had hardened into law. "And your law," Calder said carefully, "is that no man leaves once he enters." Martha nodded. "The valley decides. Men are either claimed or buried here. We could not risk word of us spreading. If outsiders knew, they'd come to conquer, to use us, to strip this land bare." Calder felt the words settle heavy in his chest. He had fought in the same war, though on a different front. He remembered the thunder of cannons, the cries of men torn apart, the long marches that ended in graves. These women had endured the same loss, only from the other side of the battlefield. "I didn't come to conquer," he said, his voice low. "I came because I thought this valley was empty." Ruth's stern eyes softened just slightly. "Empty? No, stranger. It's full of ghosts. They whisper in every tree and creek. They tell us we must endure. That's what we've done. Endured without touch, without laughter, without choice." Martha stepped closer until her shadow fell across him. "You see now why we cannot let you go. You've heard our truth. You've seen our faces. Whether you wish it or not, your fate belongs to the valley." Calder's jaw tightened. He had walked into many traps in his life, but this one was bound by grief as much as rope. Still, he felt the weight of destiny pressing in. These women were not finished with him, and he wasn't sure if he was finished with them. The next morning dawned with a thin veil of fog clinging to the valley floor. Calder awoke to the sound of axes striking wood and the low hum of women's voices. His hands were no longer bound, though two of the widows stood nearby, watchful as hounds. They gestured for him to rise, and one shoved a hunk of bread and a strip of dried meat into his hands. He ate quietly, knowing every move he made was measured. By midday, he was led to a wide clearing, where the entire band had gathered. A fire burned at the center, its smoke spiraling into the gray sky. Calder counted at least 20 women, all towering, their shoulders broad, their frames built by years of toil. Some bore scars across arms and cheeks, others carried the solemn weight of quiet authority. Their eyes fixed on him as though he were a quarry trapped in their snare. Martha Vale stood before them, holding herself like a judge about to pass sentence. She lifted a hand, and the murmurs ceased. "Stranger," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing, "you have eaten our food and slept under our watch. Now the valley must decide what is to be done with you." Calder stood tall, though he felt the press of their stares. "I didn't come seeking trouble. I'll ride out and never return, if that's what you want." A ripple of laughter spread through the gathered women, low, humorless, and edged with something darker. Ruth, the stern one with braided hair, spoke first. "And let you spread word of us? No. The world would send men by the dozen to take what remains ours." Another widow, younger but no less imposing, stepped forward. "We've been without men since the war, without touch, without children. The valley grows quiet, too quiet." Her words sent a shiver across the circle. Heads nodded, eyes flicked toward Calder with a hunger that was not wholly hostile, yet not comforting either. Martha raised her hand again. "We are not beasts, nor are we weak. We do not simply seize, but the valley does not forgive waste. You are here, that cannot be undone. The choice is simple. You remain among us, or you perish here and now." Calder felt the blood pound in his ears. "Remain among you. As what? A prisoner?" "As one of us," Martha answered. "You will work the land, tend the animals, and share in our burdens. And," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "you will restore what the war took from us. We have kept faith with silence long enough." The air grew heavy. Calder's throat tightened. He knew they meant more than chores and labor. These women wanted him bound not by rope, but by duty, by legacy. He shook his head. "I can't be what you demand. I won't be forced." Martha's gaze hardened, but Ruth leaned forward, her tone sharp as steel. "You don't decide. The valley does." Around him, the circle closed tighter. Flint stamped nervously at the edge of the clearing. Calder knew the line between guest and prisoner had vanished. In this place, freedom was not his to name. It belonged to the widows and to the valley that had shaped them. Days blurred into one another as Calder found himself woven into the rhythm of the valley. He wasn't shackled. Yet every step he took was shadowed. Two widows always kept him in sight, whether he carried buckets from the well or swung an axe at the woodpile. The valley felt both open and caged, wide meadows under endless sky, but with cliffs rising like walls on all sides. He could see freedom in every horizon, yet it was always just beyond reach. The widows put him to work quickly. He mended fences, repaired sagging barn doors, and helped drive cattle from one pasture to another. His hands, once calloused from soldiering, found new calluses in labor. Calder didn't resist. Resistance would only draw harsher punishment. Instead, he watched, listened, and measured the women who had claimed him. Not all treated him the same. Ruth, unyielding as stone, barked orders without pause, making it clear she trusted him no more than a coyote near the henhouse. Others, like young Clara, with her quiet eyes, offered a tin cup of water after a long task, or a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. They were divided, and Calder could feel the fracture lines beneath their unity. At dusk they held rituals. The women gathered around a great fire ring, each carrying a carved wooden token. Calder learned they were keepsakes of husbands lost to war buttons, knife hilts, even bullets filed smooth. The widows would raise them high and speak the names of their dead. The sound carried through the valley like a hymn, heavy with grief. Calder stood at the edge, listening, a stranger to their sorrow, yet tied to it by the same war that had stripped so much from him. Still, his thoughts turned restless. He could not stay penned in this valley forever. At night, when the campfires burned low, he studied the cliffs and the narrow trails leading upward. Escape routes were few, but he marked them all. Flint, kept under watch in a corral, would be his only chance of breaking free. He whispered to the horse whenever he could, promising they would ride again. But every plan carried danger. The widows moved with uncanny swiftness for their size, and their eyes missed little. One evening, as Calder lingered by the edge of the tree line, Martha's shadow fell across him. "You're measuring distances," she said. Her tone was calm, but her meaning sharp. "Don't think we haven't noticed." Calder held her gaze. A man can't help but look at the way out. Martha's face softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. There is no way out. The valley doesn't let go. That night, lying awake on a straw mat, Calder felt the truth press in on him. He was caught between chains he could see and chains he could feel. Part of him wanted to break free, ride until the valley was a shadow behind him. Another part, reluctant and unspoken, recognized the sorrow etched into these women's lives. The struggle tore at him, survival demanded escape, but something deeper whispered he might be bound here by more than rope and law. The chance came on a moonless night, when the clouds pressed low, blotting out the stars. Calder had been biding his time, waiting for the valley to relax its grip. The widows rotated watch duties, and he had learned their rhythm well. By his count, there would be a thin gap before dawn, when Martha's patrols changed shifts and the valley's fires burned to embers. He slipped from his mat in the longhouse, careful not to stir the straw. Outside, the air was cool and damp, smelling faintly of pine. Flint stood tethered in the corral. Calder's heart quickened at the sight of the horse, his one ally, his only hope. He crouched low, weaving between shadows until he reached the fence. With practiced hands, he loosened the knot and stroked the gelding's neck to calm him. The first problem came sooner than expected. A twig snapped across the clearing. Clara, the youngest widow, was heading toward the well with a bucket in hand. Calder froze, his fingers still on the rope. Her eyes met his in the dark. For a breathless moment, neither moved. Then, to his surprise, she lowered her gaze and walked on without raising an alarm. Perhaps pity had stayed her tongue, or perhaps rebellion brewed even in her heart. Either way, Calder wasted no time. He swung into Flint's saddle and guided him toward the north slope, where he had scouted a deer trail. The horse's hooves sank soft into the grass, muffled by the night. They climbed higher, weaving through switchbacks, the valley shrinking below like a bowl of shadow. Freedom felt close enough to taste. Then came the whistle, shrill, sharp, cutting through the stillness. Calder cursed under his breath. From below, torches flared to life, bobbing like fireflies along the valley floor. Shouts carried up the ridge. The widows were awake, and they were coming. Flint lunged forward, as Calder urged him up the trail. Behind, he heard the pounding of boots, heavy, relentless. These women moved like hunters born to the land, unafraid of darkness or incline. The trail narrowed to a ledge carved along a cliff. One misstep would send horse and rider tumbling into the gorge below. A figure surged out of the shadows ahead, blocking the path. It was Ruth, braids whipping in the wind, a spear gripped in her hands. Flint reared, and Calder pulled hard on the reins. He considered drawing his knife, but Ruth's eyes gleamed with certainty. She would not hesitate. Torches closed in from behind, pinning him in a cage of light. He had ridden through ambushes in the war, but never against enemies who knew every stone, every echo of this valley. Calder's jaw tightened. He had gambled and lost. They swarmed him, pulling him from the saddle. His knife clattered to the rocks. Flint screamed and was seized by two strong hands on his reins. Martha appeared last, her breath steady, her eyes cold. "You thought to outrun us?" she said. Her voice carried no anger, only iron. The valley always takes back what it claims. Bound once more, Calder was dragged down the slope. This time, there would be no warnings, no second chances. A reckoning awaited him at dawn. The widows dragged Calder back to the clearing before dawn, their torches throwing long, twisting shadows across the ground. The air was heavy with smoke, and the valley seemed to hold its breath. Flint was tethered nearby, stamping and tossing his head as if sensing the peril of his master. A ring of women formed around Calder, their faces hard in the firelight. Martha Vale stepped into the center, her presence towering above the others. In her hand, she held a staff carved with the names of the fallen, her husband's name near the top, the letters worn smooth from years of touch. She struck the staff against the earth, and the sound echoed like a drum. "Calder Briggs," she declared, her voice carrying to every ear. "You have broken our law. You sought to flee the valley and betray its secret. No man who has tried has ever lived to speak of us. Now, you will face the judgment of fire." A murmur rolled through the gathered widows. Some nodded with grim satisfaction. Ruth, her braided hair glinting with sparks, folded her arms, eyes blazing with certainty. Yet others, Clara, among them, looked uneasy, their gazes shifting from Calder to Martha, as though torn between duty and mercy. Calder straightened his shoulders, refusing to bow, even as two women held his arms. "I didn't come here to betray you," he said, his voice steady. "I came looking for quiet, that's all. You've made me a prisoner, and a man has the right to try for freedom." Ruth spat into the dirt. "Freedom? We buried that word when the war buried our men." Martha silenced her with a glance. "Enough. The valley will hear him no longer. He will face the flames, as the law demands." A great fire was stoked at the center of the clearing, flames leaping high, sparks swirling into the sky like lost souls. Calder was forced forward, his hands bound tight. The heat licked his skin, and sweat trickled down his neck. He braced himself, knowing death might be only breaths away. But then Clara's voice rang out, thin but clear. "This isn't justice. He hasn't harmed us. He's worked, he's labored, he's shown respect. Are we so starved for vengeance that we burn a man only for wanting freedom?" The circle stirred uneasily. Another widow, older with hair white as frost, spoke up. "Clara is right. We are not murderers. The law has bound us, yes, but perhaps the law has grown too heavy." Ruth snarled. "Soft hearts bring ruin. If we let him live, he'll betray us all." Martha raised her staff again, silencing the quarrel. Her face was carved in shadow and flame, unreadable. For a long moment, She studied Calder, her eyes narrowing as though she saw something in him she had not before. "The law must be honored," she said slowly, "but justice is not only fire. If the valley will not take his life, then it will take his freedom." The staff struck the earth once more. "From this day, Calder Briggs is bound to us. He works where we set him, lives as we command, and owes his breath to the valley. Any defiance, and the fire will finish what it began." The women roared their agreement, some with relief, others with fury. Calder's chest tightened. He had escaped the flames, but in their place he had been given a harsher sentence, life bound to the widows, chained not by rope, but by decree. As dawn bled over the ridges, Calder knew the valley had tightened its hold. His trial was over, but his true test had only begun. Calder's days lengthened into a pattern that felt half like labor and half like punishment. From sunrise until the stars returned, he worked among the widows, mending harness straps, hauling hay, splitting wood, until his shoulders burned. The valley was alive with silence, broken only by the lowing of cattle or the clang of an iron tool against stone. Though his body bent under the tasks, his mind stayed sharp. He studied the valley the way a scout studies enemy ground, and he began to notice things that didn't fit the story Martha told. One afternoon, while repairing the roof of a storehouse, Calder spotted something peculiar. Beneath a pile of tarps in the loft, crates were stacked neatly, too clean to have weathered 20 years of abandonment. When he pried one open, he found rusted rifles and a pouch of cartridges sealed in wax. They were relics from the war, yet looked preserved, hidden, as if waiting for a time when they might be needed again. That night, Clara brought him water as he sat outside the longhouse. She lingered, glancing nervously at the guards who stood nearby. "You shouldn't go poking where you don't belong," she whispered. Calder raised an eyebrow. "Strange advice for someone who spared me at the corral. What are you hiding, Clara?" Her lips pressed tight, but her eyes betrayed unease. "Not all the husbands died. Some marched away and never returned because they were never meant to. Martha keeps the truth close. The rest of us—" She shook her head, cutting herself short. "I've said too much." She slipped back into the shadows, leaving Calder with more questions than answers. The next day, Martha set him to hauling stones for a wall along the river. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but his gaze wandered to the caves cut into the cliffs beyond. He'd noticed them before, dark mouths gaping in the rock, but now he watched as two widows carried bundles inside, emerging later empty-handed. Their movements were deliberate, secretive. That evening, Calder feigned exhaustion and asked to rest by the riverbank. When the guards grew lax, he slipped away, climbing toward the caves under cover of dusk. Inside, the air was cool, carrying the scent of oil and iron. Torches lined the walls, revealing more crates, dozens, even hundreds, stacked high. Rifles, sabers, powder, uniforms folded with care. It was an armory, not a tomb. As he reached for one of the crates, a voice echoed behind him. "Now you've seen it." Martha stood in the entrance, her staff in hand. Her face was grim, but her eyes glimmered with something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or defiance. "This valley," she said, stepping closer, "was never abandoned. It was fortified. Our men swore to return, but they left us with their weapons instead, and so we waited. We buried our grief with steel, for the day the world might come seeking what we guard." Calder's breath caught. The widow's sorrow was not just born of loss. It was tied to a secret cache of war, hidden away from the eyes of the outside world. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as the crack of a rifle. "Now you understand why you cannot leave. You carry knowledge that could ruin us all." The discovery of the hidden armory spread through Calder's thoughts like wildfire, and he knew the knowledge would not rest quietly inside him. The valley's women had shaped their lives around silence, but secrets that deep could not stay buried forever. His unease turned to certainty the next morning when the murmurs began. Widows whispered as they worked, voices sharp and hushed, eyes darting toward Martha Vale with both suspicion and resentment. By midday, the tension could be felt in every corner of the settlement. Clara approached Calder while he hammered boards onto a fence. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wood for him. "They know you found the caves," she said. "Some are glad. Others are furious. Martha has kept the truth hidden too long." Calder lowered the hammer slowly. "And what truth is that?" "That the husbands who marched to war might still live. Or if they died, they left us not empty-handed, but waiting for orders that never came. Martha said the armory was for our protection, but some think she hoarded it to keep her grip on power." The words struck like a musket ball. Calder realized the valley was already divided. His discovery had only widened the crack. That evening, the fire circle turned to chaos. Ruth stood beside Martha, her braids swinging like a whip as she shouted, "This man has poisoned us! He doubts where there was order. Martha has led us faithfully for 20 years. Will you throw that away because a drifter pried into the shadows?" But Clara raised her voice, surprising them all. "No, Ruth, the poison is secrecy. We've labored, bled, and buried under the weight of lies. Why should one woman alone decide our fate? Why should we live like prisoners, while weapons gather dust in caves?" The widows erupted in clashing voices. Some roared their loyalty to Martha. Others echoed Clara, demanding freedom of choice. The circle fractured into two halves, faces lit by firelight and fury. Martha's staff struck the ground with a heavy crack. Silence fell, but the air still vibrated with anger. Her voice was steady, yet strained. "The valley survived because I bore its burdens. I guarded its secret. Without me, you'd be bones in the soil." Calder stepped forward, though he knew the risk. "Survival is not life, Martha. You've kept them caged as much as you've kept them safe. They don't need chains of silence, they need a future." For the first time, Martha faltered. Her eyes swept the circle, seeing doubt even in the faces of women who once stood firm at her side. The weight of years pressed against her shoulders, and Calder knew the tide had turned. Finally, she lowered the staff. "If the valley no longer trusts me, then let it choose anew." Her words cracked like ice splitting on a river. "But know this, without order, you invite ruin." The circle broke apart in turmoil, half surging toward Calder, half clinging to Martha. For the first time since he entered the valley, Calder felt the choice was his to make: run in the chaos, or stand with these women as they tore themselves free of old chains. He did not flee. Instead, he stood tall and faced the firelight, knowing the next dawn would not bring silence but change. The valley was rising, and he was now bound to its fate. The valley woke to stillness, but it was no longer the heavy silence Calder had first felt when he arrived. It was the quiet that follows a storm, when the air feels sharper, cleaner. The fire circle from the night before was scattered with ashes, and the widows moved among them not as prisoners of grief, but as women unburdened. Martha Vale stood apart, her staff planted in the soil. Though stripped of her authority, she carried herself with the same fierce strength. Calder approached, expecting defiance, but her eyes were weary. "The valley has spoken," she said. "My rule is over. But don't mistake this for weakness. These women will endure long after you or I are dust." Clara joined Calder, her voice firm but hopeful. "Endure, yes, but no longer in chains. We'll decide together now. Not in whispers, not in fear." Others nodded, their faces softened by something that had been missing for years: choice. Calder felt the weight in his chest ease. He had entered as an outsider, meant to be consumed by their law. Yet now, he was neither captive nor conqueror. He was part of something fragile, something new. The valley had claimed him, not with ropes or fire, but with trust. As the sun rose over the ridges, its light poured across fields and homesteads, painting the valley in gold. Laughter broke out among the women as they began their morning work, lighter than before. Flint snorted in the corral, pawing at the earth as if sensing freedom too. Calder looked to the horizon. He could leave, but he knew he wouldn't. Destiny had bound him here, not to walls of stone, but to lives in need of rebuilding. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.